Tonight we are going to talk about why life so often feels like a struggle and what the Buddha discovered about it. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. These are old questions. Over 2,000 years ago, the Buddha looked at them carefully, and what he found was surprisingly simple. He said that most of our suffering is not caused by what happens to us, but rather by how we respond to what happens to us. We grasp at things that cannot stay. We push away things that have already arrived. We fight with our own feelings. And we do all of this so automatically that we barely notice it is happening. He also said it can stop. That is what tonight is about. We are going to look at these patterns through stories and teachings that have helped people for a very long time. You do not need to do anything. If sleep comes, let it come. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. There is a question that most of us carry quietly through our lives without ever putting it into words. It goes something like this: why is it that getting what I want so rarely feels like enough? We have all had the experience. There is something we desire: a meal, a purchase, a particular experience, a change in our circumstances. The mind locks onto it. We think about it, plan for it, look forward to it. And when we finally get it, there is a moment of pleasure, sometimes a wonderful moment. But then, something curious happens. The satisfaction begins to thin. It fades. And before long, the mind is already reaching for the next thing. This is one of the most universal patterns in human life. And it is also one of the oldest observations in Buddhist teaching. The Buddha spoke about this directly. He said that craving is one of the deepest roots of our suffering. Not because pleasure is wrong, not because wanting is sinful, but because looking to desire for lasting peace is like trying to drink from a cup with no bottom. It does not matter how often you fill it. Tonight, we are going to look gently at this pattern, not to judge it or fix it, just to see it clearly. Because something interesting happens when we stop and actually watch the wanting mind at work. We begin to notice that the struggle we feel in daily life is not always about what is happening around us. Often, it is about what is happening inside us. The grasping, the reaching, the quiet hunger that never seems to rest. The Buddha put it plainly in the Dhammapada. From craving springs grief. From craving springs fear. For one who is wholly free from craving, there is no grief. How then could there be fear? These words are over 2,000 years old, and they describe something you can feel in your own body right now if you pay close attention. Let us explore a story. In a small village at the edge of a river valley, there lived an old man who was known for being both wise and foolish in equal measure. The villagers never quite knew what to make of him. He would say things that sounded absurd one moment and deeply true the next. Children followed him around. Elders shook their heads at him. He seemed to live in a world slightly different from everyone else's. One evening, the air was cool and the sky was just beginning to darken. A few of his neighbors were walking home after a long day in the fields. Their feet were tired and their shoulders ached, and they were looking forward to a quiet supper. As they came around the corner near the village square, they saw the old man on his hands and knees beneath the single lantern that hung above the well. He was patting the ground, running his fingers through the dust, peering closely at the dirt. "What are you doing?" one of the neighbors asked. "I have lost the key to my house," the old man said, without looking up. "I cannot get in without it." "How long have you been out here?" asked another neighbor. "Oh, a good while now," the old man said. He did not seem distressed. He was patting the ground methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. They were kind people, so they knelt down and began to help. One of them brushed aside pebbles. Another ran his hand along the edge of the stone wall. A third checked the cracks between the paving stones. They searched carefully, thoroughly, patiently. The lantern above them cast a warm circle of light, and they covered every inch of it. They searched the base of the well. They checked behind the water bucket. They lifted the edges of the mat where the old man sometimes sat to watch the sunset. Nothing. After quite a long time, one of the neighbors sat back on his heels and wiped his forehead. "We have looked everywhere under this lantern," he said. "Are you sure you lost the key here?" "Oh no," said the old man, still searching. "I lost it inside my house." A long pause. The neighbors looked at each other. "Then why on earth are you looking out here?" The old man looked up. His face was calm and open and not the least bit embarrassed. "Because there is more light here," he said. The neighbors probably thought he had lost his mind along with his key. But this small story has traveled across centuries and across cultures because it points to something we all do. Something so common that we barely notice it. We search for happiness where the light is bright, where it is easy to look, where everyone else is looking. We look in the next meal, the next purchase, the next achievement, the next experience. We look in comfort and pleasure and novelty. And these things do shine. They catch the eye. They feel promising. But the key is not there. The key, as the old man knew, is somewhere quieter, somewhere less obvious, somewhere inside. And this is where the theme of tonight's episode begins to show itself. Why does life so often feel like a struggle? Part of the answer is that we are expending enormous energy searching in the wrong direction. We are working very hard under the lamppost, turning over every stone, calling our friends to help, and all the while, the key is sitting in the quiet of our own house. The struggle is real, but it is not caused by a lack of light. It is caused by a misunderstanding about where to look. The Buddha understood this deeply. He spent years living in luxury before he left his comfortable life to seek the truth. He had tasted every pleasure available to a prince. Fine food, beautiful surroundings, entertainment, comfort. And what he discovered was not that these things were bad, but that they were simply not capable of providing the peace he was looking for. They could offer moments of pleasure, but peace, real peace, the kind that does not depend on conditions, that was found somewhere else entirely. This is an important point, because the teaching here is not about giving up enjoyment or becoming stern or joyless. It is about seeing clearly. It is about recognizing that when we rely on pleasant experiences to make us whole, we are setting up a situation that cannot work. Not because we are doing it wrong, but because pleasant experiences, by their nature, come and go. They change. They end. And then the wanting returns. Think for a moment about all the pleasant experiences you have had in your life. There have been many. Wonderful meals, beautiful days, kind words, moments of laughter, the warmth of people you love. These are genuine gifts. But have they added up to a lasting sense of peace? Have they brought you to a place where the wanting finally stopped? If they had, you would not still be searching. None of us would. But here we are, still looking for the next thing. And that is not a failure. It is simply the nature of how craving works. It is a cup with no bottom. There is a teaching in Zen that says, you cannot fill what has no edges. Craving has no edges. It expands to fit whatever space you give it. Satisfy one desire and another appears in its place. Sometimes immediately, sometimes after a brief pause, but always, eventually, the reaching begins again. Let us sit with another story for a moment. A young traveler had been walking for many days through dry, flat country. The road was long and the sun was steady and she had not eaten well in some time. Late one afternoon, she came over a low hill and saw, in the valley below, a walled garden. The trees inside were heavy with fruit. Figs and pomegranates and apricots, their branches bending under the weight. At the gate sat an old woman on a wooden stool. She looked up as the traveler approached. "May I have something to eat?" The traveler asked. "I have been walking a long time." "Of course," said the old woman. "Take whatever you like. There is no charge." The traveler stepped inside. She reached up and picked a ripe fig from the nearest tree. She bit into it and the sweetness flooded her mouth. It was extraordinary. She had never tasted anything so good. She closed her eyes and let the flavor settle. When she opened her eyes, she saw an apricot on a nearby branch, golden and soft. She reached for it. It was just as wonderful, rich and warm and perfect. Then she noticed the pomegranates. She cracked one open and ate the seeds one by one, each one bursting with a cool, sharp sweetness. She moved from tree to tree. Every fruit was ripe. Every fruit was delicious. She ate figs, apricots, pomegranates, plums, things she did not even have names for. She ate and ate. And each time she finished one piece of fruit, her eyes moved immediately to the next. After a long while, she sat down on the grass. Her belly was full, but her eyes were still scanning the branches. The old woman had come to stand nearby. She was watching the traveler with a gentle expression. "I am full," the traveler said. "I could not eat another bite, but I still want to." The old woman nodded. "That is the nature of wanting," she said. "It does not live in the belly. It lives in the mind, and the mind is never full." The traveler sat with this for a moment. She looked around the garden, at all the fruit she had not yet tasted. The wanting was still there, not in her body, which was satisfied, but somewhere behind her eyes something was still reaching. "Will it stop?" she asked. The old woman looked at her for a long moment. "Not by eating more fruit," she said. "You could eat every piece of fruit in this garden, and tomorrow the wanting would return. The fruit is not the problem. The reaching is the problem." This is the quiet truth at the center of craving. The pleasure is real. The fig was genuinely sweet. The satisfaction is not a lie. But the wanting that follows is not about the fruit. It is about the nature of the mind itself. The mind moves from one pleasant thing to the next, not because none of them are good enough, but because moving is what the mind does. Reaching is its habit. Grasping is its pattern. This is what the Buddha was pointing to when he said, Even a shower of gold coins would not satisfy craving. The wise know that craving brings little sweetness and much pain. He was not being harsh. He was being precise. He was describing something we can all feel if we slow down enough to notice. And there is something almost gentle in seeing this clearly. We have had thousands of pleasant experiences in our lives. Thousands. Wonderful meals, warm embraces, beautiful sunsets, satisfying achievements. Each one was real. Each one mattered. But not one of them put an end to the wanting. After every wonderful experience, the mind eventually turned and began reaching for the next one. If pleasant experiences could bring lasting fulfillment, then by now, after all these years and all these moments, we would surely be at peace. But craving does not keep a ledger. It does not say, "That was enough." It simply continues. It is its nature to continue. Here is what is easy to miss about craving. We tend to think that the discomfort we feel is about not having the thing we want. If only I had it, I would be at peace. But look a little more closely, and something else becomes clear. The discomfort is in the wanting itself. Think about what the wanting mind actually feels like in the body. There is a leaning forward, a tightness in the chest or the belly, a narrowing of attention as if the whole world shrinks down to a single point, a single object of desire. The jaw tightens slightly. The breath becomes shallow. The whole body orients itself towards something that is not here yet. It is a posture of incompleteness, a posture that says, "This moment is not enough. I need something more." There is a kind of poverty in this posture, even when we are surrounded by abundance. We could be sitting in a warm room with a full belly and people who care about us, and if the wanting mind is active, we feel as though something is missing. That is the nature of craving. It does not measure what we have. It only measures the distance between where we are and where it wants us to be. Now think about what happens in the moment when a desire fades. Not when you get the thing you wanted, but when the wanting itself simply passes. Maybe you were craving something all afternoon, and then you got absorbed in a conversation, or a walk, or a quiet task, and when you thought about it again, the desire was gone. You had not satisfied it. It had simply left on its own. Do you remember how that feels? There is a settling, a softening. The body relaxes back into itself. The breath deepens. The mind opens. It is a small moment of relief, and it has nothing to do with getting what you wanted. The relief comes from the absence of the wanting. This is something worth pausing over. The peace you feel when desire passes is not the peace of fulfillment. It is the peace of release. The wanting itself was the weight. And when it dropped away, what remained was simply ease. Not excitement, not triumph, just a quiet return to something that was already there. The Buddha taught this again and again. In the Sutta Nipata, one of the oldest collections of his teachings, he said, "For one who has let go of craving, peace follows like a shadow that never leaves." Peace does not come from acquiring. It comes from releasing. Now, this teaching is easy to hear and nod along with. Yes, craving causes suffering. Of course, that makes sense. But actually seeing it in our own lives, in real time, is something different. Because craving is not just a concept. It is a lived experience. It moves through the body like a current. It colors our thoughts. It shapes our choices. It is the invisible thread behind so much of what we do each day, pulling us from one thing to the next. And it is old, very old. The Buddha described craving as one of the deepest forces in the mind. It is not a quirk of modern life or a product of advertising. It is woven into the way the mind works. It has been pulling at human beings for as long as there have been human beings. We have been looking under the lamppost for a very long time. And so the question naturally arises, what do we do with this? If craving is so deep and so old, are we simply trapped by it? The answer the Buddha gave is no. But the path he offered was not what we might expect. He did not say, fight your desires. He did not say, punish yourself for wanting. That would just be another form of struggle, and we have enough of that already. The teaching is much gentler than that. It is simply to see. This is one of the most radical things about the Buddhist path. It does not ask you to become a different person. It asks you to become aware of the person you already are. To notice what is happening as it is happening without adding anything to it. When wanting arises, notice it. Not to push it away. Not to act on it immediately. Just to feel it. What does it actually feel like, this wanting? Where does it live in the body? What does the mind do when it is in the grip of desire? And then, if you wait, what happens? Does the wanting stay forever? Or does it, like everything else, rise and fall on its own? Most of us have never just watched a craving without doing anything about it. We either chase it or we resist it. Both are forms of engagement. Both keep the cycle going. But there is a third possibility, and it is the simplest one. Just watch. Just notice. Let the craving be there, without being its servant. There is an old Zen saying, let thoughts come and let them go. Just do not serve them tea. You do not need to fight your cravings. You do not need to chase them. You can simply watch them arrive, sit for a while, and leave. Like clouds passing through an open sky. They appear, they drift, they dissolve, and the sky remains. This is what awareness does. It creates space. Space between the wanting and the acting. Space between the craving and the reaching. And in that space, something new becomes possible. You begin to see that the craving is not you. It is something that passes through you, like weather through a valley. It arises because of conditions. It stays for a while, and then it goes. You do not have to follow it. You do not have to be governed by it. You can simply let it pass. And here is the gentlest part of this teaching. Every time you notice a craving without acting on it, without fighting it, the craving loses a little of its power. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped feeding it. You stopped pouring your attention and your energy into the struggle. And without that fuel, the fire of wanting naturally dims. There is something deeply restful about this understanding, because it means that the peace we are searching for is not somewhere else. It is not in the next experience, or the next achievement, or the next rearrangement of our circumstances. It is already here, underneath all the reaching. Think of a lake in the early morning. When the wind blows across it, the surface churns with waves. It looks unsettled, restless. But beneath the surface, the water is still. It has always been still. The wind did not create the lake. It only disturbed the surface. Craving is like that wind. It moves across the surface of the mind and creates the appearance of agitation. But it does not touch the depth. And when the wind calms, when the wanting eases, what is revealed is not something new. It is something that was there all along. A quiet, a fullness, an ease that does not depend on anything. This is what the old man in the story knew, even if he could not say it plainly. The key was inside all along. The problem was never that peace was missing. The problem was that we were looking in the wrong place. We were out under the lamppost, dazzled by the light, when the door to our own house was waiting quietly behind us. The Buddha called this the end of seeking. Not because there is nothing worth experiencing, but because the deepest peace is not something you find. It is something you uncover when the searching stops. Tonight, there is nothing you need to reach for, nothing you need to add to this moment. You can let the wanting rest. You can let the searching pause. And in that pause, notice what remains. The breath moving gently. The body held by whatever is beneath you. The mind, a little quieter now perhaps than it was a few minutes ago. That quiet is not something you created. It was here before you arrived. It will be here after you leave. It is always here, patient and still, waiting for the moment when we stop looking under the lamppost and come home. Let us pause here for a moment. There is no rush. Notice the quality of your breathing. Notice how your body feels right now, just as it is. And when you are ready, we will continue together. In Buddhist teaching, there is a simple idea that changes everything once you really hear it. The Buddha said that when something unpleasant happens to us, it is like being struck by an arrow. It hurts. That is the first arrow, and we often have no control over it. But then, almost immediately, we fire a second arrow at ourselves. We resist what has happened. We tighten against it. We tell ourselves it should not be this way. And that second arrow, the one we add, often hurts far more than the first. The first arrow is the situation. The second arrow is our struggle with it. This is one of the most useful teachings in all of Buddhism, because it draws a clean line between two things we usually blur together: what is happening and how we are relating to what is happening. Most of the time, we assume they are the same thing. We think the situation is making us suffer. But when we look closely, we begin to see that much of our suffering is being created not by the situation itself, but by the wall we are building against it. This is where the struggle in our lives so often lies. Not in the events themselves, but in the resistance we bring to them. There is a story about a young monk who had been practicing meditation for several years at a busy monastery in a large town. He was earnest and devoted, but the monastery was noisy. Other monks came and went. Visitors arrived at all hours. Dogs barked in the courtyard. Carts rattled past on the road outside. He dreamed of silence. He felt certain that if he could just find a truly quiet place, his practice would deepen. His mind would settle. He would finally make the progress he longed for. So when the warm season came, he asked his teacher for permission to go into the hills. There was a small stone cottage high up in the foothills, surrounded by cedar trees, overlooking a wide green valley. It had been used by monks before. It was remote, simple, and above all, quiet. His teacher looked at him for a long moment. "You may go," he said. "But remember, you are bringing your mind with you." The monk smiled politely, not really hearing the warning. He packed his few things and made the long walk up into the hills. The cottage was everything he had hoped for. The air was cool and clean. The view stretched for miles. In the mornings, the only sounds were birdsong and the soft movement of wind through the cedars. He sat on a flat stone outside the door and meditated, and the silence wrapped around him like a blanket. He felt something loosen in his chest. This was it. This was the place. For the first week, it was perfect. He rose before dawn and watched the light come slowly into the valley. He sat for hours, his mind settling deeper than it ever had in the crowded monastery. In the afternoons, he walked the narrow paths through the cedar trees, feeling the bark under his fingertips, listening to the small sounds of the forest. In the evenings, he sat again as the sky turned gold, and then violet, and then dark, and the stars came out one by one. Each day, the silence seemed to deepen. Not just the silence outside, but a stillness inside that he had been wanting for a long time. He felt a gratitude so large it almost brought tears. This was what practice was supposed to feel like. This was where he was meant to be. Then, on the 8th morning, he heard drums. At first it was faint, a distant rhythmic thumping from somewhere down in the valley. He tried to ignore it. It faded for a while, and he thought it had passed. But by midday, it was louder. And now there were voices too. Singing, laughter, the clatter of pots, and the sound of children calling to one another. He walked to the edge of the ridge and looked down. In the meadow below his cottage, a large group of travelers had made camp. There were tents and cook fires and pack animals. And in the center of the camp, a circle of musicians were playing drums and flutes and singing. His heart sank. He told himself it would be temporary. A day, perhaps two. They were probably just passing through. But the next morning, the drums began again at sunrise, and they continued through the day. The singing went on until well after dark. The children ran and shouted. Someone had brought a bell that rang at odd intervals throughout the afternoon. It was not temporary. The group had settled in for the season. Now, what happened next inside the monk is something most of us will recognize, because we have all been in situations we could not change, noise we could not quiet, circumstances that did not bend to our wishes. At first, there was disbelief. This cannot be happening. Then came irritation, a tightness in the jaw, a restlessness in the body, a sharpness in his thoughts. He found himself sitting on his stone with his eyes closed, but his attention was no longer on his breath. It was on the drums. Every beat pulled him out of his stillness. Every burst of laughter felt like a personal interruption. He tried closing the shutters. He tried meditating indoors. He tried sitting on the far side of the cottage, where the sound was slightly muffled. Nothing worked. The sound was everywhere. It filled the valley and rose up the hillside and seeped through the stone walls. After a few days, he walked down to the meadow. He found the elder of the group and explained, as calmly as he could, that he was a monk on retreat and that the noise was disturbing his practice. Could they perhaps play their music more quietly? Or at certain hours only? The elder was kind. She listened carefully. She nodded with sympathy. And then she said, gently, that her people had been coming to this meadow for many generations. It was their gathering place. The music and the singing were part of their tradition. She was sorry for the disturbance, but there was nothing she could do. How long will you stay? The monk asked. Until the rains come, she said. That was months away. He walked back up the hill feeling heavy. The drums followed him all the way. He sat down on his stone and closed his eyes and tried to find his breath, but all he could hear was the music, and all he could feel was a growing knot of frustration in his chest. He had done everything he could. He had asked. He had been polite, and it had made no difference. That evening, he sat outside and watched the cook fires glowing in the meadow below. He could hear singing drifting up through the trees. It was beautiful, actually, if he was honest. But he was not in the mood to be honest. He was in the mood to be right. He was in the mood for silence, and silence was the one thing he could not have. For the next several days, the monk sat with a divided mind. Half of him was trying to meditate. The other half was at war with the sound. He noticed his thoughts becoming sharp and unkind. Why did they have to come here? Why this valley? Why now? He noticed a kind of accounting happening in his mind, a tally of how many hours of silence he had lost, how many sittings had been interrupted, how much progress had been undone. He noticed something else too. He was suffering, not mildly, but steadily. A tight, uncomfortable feeling that sat in his chest from morning until night. He was not at peace. He had not been at peace since the drums began. And the strangest part was this: the suffering felt bigger than the noise justified. A group of people playing music in a field should not have been able to destroy a grown man's peace of mind. But it had. Something about this did not add up. And here is where something began to shift. Because the monk was trained to pay attention. That was his practice. Not just to pay attention to pleasant things, or to silence, or to his breath, but to pay attention to whatever was actually happening. And when he turned his attention away from the sound and toward his own reaction, he saw something clearly for the first time. The sound was just sound, vibrations in the air, drum beats and voices and laughter rising and falling, coming and going. That was the first arrow. And it was, in truth, not so terrible. It was just noise. It had no opinion about him. It was not trying to ruin his retreat. It was not personal. It was simply the sound of people living their lives in a meadow below his cottage. But his resistance to the sound, that was something else entirely. That was a clenched fist inside his chest. That was a story running constantly in his mind about how things should be, about how he had been wronged, about how the silence had been stolen from him. That was the second arrow, and it was the second arrow that was causing nearly all of his pain. He began to see that he had two experiences running side by side. One was the sound itself, which was neutral, neither good nor bad, just present. The other was his war with the sound, which was hot and tight and exhausting. He had been so focused on trying to stop the first that he had not noticed the second was doing all the damage. He sat with this for a long time. The drums were still playing. The children were still calling to one another. The bell was still ringing at odd intervals. Nothing outside had changed. Not one thing. but he stopped fighting it. He did not force himself to like the sound. He did not pretend it was pleasant. He did not tell himself a story about how the noise was a gift or a blessing. He simply stopped adding the second arrow. He let the sound come in. He let it be there, alongside his breath, alongside the wind, alongside the bird song. Just another thing happening in the valley. Not an enemy, not an obstacle, just sound. And something remarkable occurred. The tightness in his chest began to soften. The sharp thoughts slowed down. The suffering, that contracted feeling he had been carrying for days, it began to ease. Not all at once, but gradually, the way a fist unclenches when you stop squeezing. Not because the sound had stopped. It had not stopped. The drums were as loud as ever. But the war had stopped. And it was the war, not the drums, that had been causing his pain. This is one of the most liberating things a person can discover. The situation is rarely the full cause of our suffering. Our relationship to the situation is where most of the pain lives. The Buddha taught this with great care because it is easy to misunderstand. He was not saying that difficult situations do not matter. He was not saying we should simply accept everything that happens without response. Sometimes action is needed. Sometimes we must change our circumstances. But he was pointing to something we almost always overlook. Before we can respond wisely to any situation, we need to see clearly what is the situation and what is our reaction to it. Because very often, the reaction is creating far more suffering than the situation itself. Think of a night when you could not sleep. Perhaps there was noise outside, or a worry turning in your mind, or some discomfort in the body. The noise or the worry or the discomfort was the first arrow. But then came the second arrow. The frustration about not sleeping. The worry about being tired tomorrow. The tight, restless resistance to being awake. And if you have had this experience, you know that the second arrow, the layer of struggle you added on top, was usually worse than the original problem. Or think of being stuck somewhere you did not want to be. A long wait, a delayed journey, an afternoon that did not go as planned. The situation itself was simply what it was. But the mind began to add, "This should not be happening. This is a waste of my time. I should be somewhere else." And that layer of resistance turned a neutral situation into a source of real unhappiness. The Zen teacher, Shunryu Suzuki, once said something very simple about this. He said, "The world is its own magic." What he meant, in part, is that reality does not need our approval. It is already happening. It is already complete. Our opinions about whether it should be different do not change what is. They only change how we feel about what is. And usually, they make us feel worse. The monk in our story discovered this on a hillside, with drums playing in the valley below. But the same discovery is available in the smallest moments of ordinary life. A conversation does not go the way we hoped. Rain falls on a day we wanted sun. Someone speaks sharply. A plan unravels. Traffic slows. The body aches. In each of these moments, there is the event, and then there is our commentary on the event. The event is usually manageable. The commentary is where the suffering builds. In Buddhist teaching, this pattern is sometimes described as the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the first arrow. It is a natural part of being alive. Bodies feel The weather does not cooperate. These things happen. They are not personal. They are not punishment. They are simply part of the texture of life. Suffering is the second arrow. It is what we add. The resistance, the story, the wish that things were different, the tightening against what is. And unlike pain, suffering is optional. Not easily optional. Not trivially optional, but genuinely optional, in the sense that it is something we are doing, not something being done to us. And what we are doing, we can, with practice and patience, learn to stop doing. The Buddha said, "In life, pain is certain. Suffering is a choice. That choice is not always obvious. It is not always easy, but it is always there. And once you begin to see it, you see it everywhere. You see it in the small frustrations of a day that did not go as planned. You see it in the way the mind tightens when someone says something careless. You see it in the gap between what you expected and what you got. In each of these moments, there is the event, plain and simple, and then there is the story you are telling yourself about the event. And the story is almost always heavier than the event itself. There is an old Buddhist image that captures this well. Imagine holding a hot coal in your hand. It burns. That is obvious. But who is holding it? You are. And you can put it down at any time. The burn is real, but the continued holding is your choice. Most of us walk around clutching hot coals and wondering why our hands hurt. Letting go does not mean that nothing matters. It does not mean that you stop caring or stop responding to the world. It simply means that you stop adding unnecessary pain on top of the pain that is already there. You let the first arrow be enough. You stop reaching for the second one. There is a practice in Zen called just sitting. It sounds deceptively simple. You sit. Whatever arises, you let it arise. Whatever passes, you let it pass. You do not try to create a particular state of mind. You do not try to push anything away. You simply sit in the middle of whatever is happening and let it be. There is no goal in just sitting. No destination to reach. No experience to manufacture. You are not trying to feel calm or peaceful or wise. You are simply present with whatever is here. If there is noise, there is noise. If there is discomfort, there is discomfort. If there is restlessness, there is restlessness. None of it is a problem. None of it needs to be fixed. It is all just weather passing through. The monk on the hillside, without quite knowing it, stumbled into this. When he stopped fighting the sound, he was just sitting. The drums were there. His breath was there. The wind was there. His thoughts came and went. None of it needed to be different. None of it needed his permission or his resistance. It was all just happening, and he was there in the middle of it, and that was enough. This is a quiet kind of freedom. It does not look dramatic from the outside. Nothing changes in the world. The drums keep playing. The children keep laughing. The bell keeps ringing. But inside, something has shifted. The war is over. Not because one side won, but because one side put down its weapons. And what remains, when the fighting stops, is surprisingly simple. Just this. Just what is happening. Just the sound of the world going about its business. Just the breath rising and falling. Just the body resting on its stone. Just this moment, without a second arrow. Without a story about how it should be different. Without a commentary running underneath it. Just life happening the way it always does. There is a line from the Dhammapada that speaks to this. The Buddha said, "Those who are free from resentful thoughts surely find peace, not free from difficulty, not free from noise or disruption or things that do not go their way, free from resentful thoughts, free from the second arrow. That is where peace lives, not in the absence of trouble, but in the absence of resistance to trouble." The monk stayed in his cottage for the rest of the season. The travelers stayed in their meadow. The drums played every day. And every day, the monk sat on his stone and let the sound wash over him and through him without resistance. It became part of his practice. In a way he never expected, the noise became his teacher. It taught him something no amount of silence ever could. It taught him that peace does not depend on conditions. This is worth sitting with for a moment. We spend so much of our lives arranging conditions, trying to get the right job, the right home, the right relationship, the right amount of quiet, and those things matter. But if our peace depends entirely on conditions being right, then we are always one unexpected change away from suffering. One set of drums in the valley, and the whole thing falls apart. The freedom the monk found was not freedom from noise. It was freedom from needing silence in order to be at peace. And that is a much deeper kind of freedom. It goes with you wherever you go. It does not depend on the valley being empty or the world being quiet. It lives inside, underneath the noise, underneath the conditions, in a place that the second arrow cannot reach. When the monk returned to the monastery in the autumn, his own teacher asked him how the retreat had gone. The monk thought about it for a moment. "It was not what I expected," he said, "but it was exactly what I needed." His teacher smiled. "You brought your mind with you," he said, "and you brought it back. That is the practice." Take a breath here. Let whatever you are feeling right now simply be what it is. There is nowhere else to go, nothing to fix. Just rest in this moment, and we will continue when it feels right. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, feelings arise that we did not invite. Sadness that has no obvious cause. A heaviness in the chest. A sense of loneliness that shows up even when we are surrounded by people. A feeling of not being quite enough, though we could not say enough. For what? These feelings tend to come when the noise of the day fades, when there is nothing left to distract us. They were there all along, of course, waiting beneath the surface. But we are very good at keeping busy, very practiced at filling the hours with activity and noise and movement, so that we do not have to sit with what is underneath. In Buddhist teaching, these uninvited feelings are not problems to be solved. They are not signs that something is wrong with us. They are part of being human. The Buddha taught that discomfort, both physical and emotional, is a natural part of life. Sadness is natural. Loneliness is natural. Fear is natural. They arise because of causes and conditions, and when those conditions change, they pass. They are not permanent. They are not who we are. But here is what most of us do with these feelings, and it is the most natural thing in the world. We push them away. We tighten against them. We tell ourselves we should not be feeling this way. We distract ourselves, or we bury the feeling under layers of activity, or we simply refuse to look at it. And in doing so, we create a very particular kind of struggle, a quiet war with parts of ourselves. This is one of the less obvious reasons life feels like a struggle. It is not just the external circumstances, the noise in the valley, the craving for the next thing. It is also this inner resistance, the pushing away of feelings that are already here. And because these feelings are inside us, there is nowhere to run. We carry the battlefield with us everywhere we go. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron once described this as being at war with your own experience. She said that we spend enormous energy trying to maintain a particular version of ourselves. The version that is confident, that is happy, that has everything together. And anything that threatens that version, any feeling that does not fit the picture, gets pushed underground. But pushing things underground does not make them disappear. It just makes the ground unsteady. There is a story about a young woman who traveled a great distance to study with a Buddhist teacher who lived in a small hermitage at the edge of a forest. She had heard that this teacher had a gift for helping people find peace, and she needed peace badly because she had been carrying a feeling she could not shake. It was a feeling of unworthiness, a deep, persistent sense that she was not good enough, not smart enough, not kind enough, not strong enough. It colored everything she did. When she accomplished something, the feeling told her it was not enough. When someone was kind to her, the feeling told her she did not deserve it. It sat in her chest and stomach, heavy and dull, and it had been there for as long as she could remember. She arrived at the hermitage tired and hoping for an answer. The teacher was an older woman with steady eyes and a calm manner. She welcomed the young woman, gave her tea, and asked her to describe what she was struggling with. The young woman explained. She told the teacher about the feeling, how it followed her everywhere, how she had tried everything to get rid of it. She had read books about confidence. She had repeated kind words to herself in the mirror. She had thrown herself into work, hoping that achievement would silence the voice. She had even tried to reason with it, arguing against it the way you might argue with a stubborn friend. And what happened? The teacher asked. Nothing, the young woman said. It is still there. Sometimes I think it is even stronger than before. The teacher nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what she expected to hear. I want you to try something, she said. Tonight, when the feeling comes, I want you to do nothing about it. Nothing? Nothing. Do not try to fix it. Do not argue with it. Do not push it away. Do not distract yourself from it. Just let it be there. Sit with it the way you would sit with another person in the room. You do not have to like it. You do not have to understand it. Just let it stay. The young woman looked uncertain. That is the opposite of everything I have been doing, she said. Yes, said the teacher. That is the point. That evening, the young woman sat alone in her small room. She had a candle and a thin sleeping mat and the sounds of the forest outside. The room was plain. Wooden walls, a small window, the smell of cedar. She could hear frogs somewhere in the distance and the occasional rustle of wind through the leaves. As the quiet settled around her, the feeling came, just as it always did. That familiar heaviness, that voice saying, "You are not enough. You are not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy of being here." Her first instinct was to push it away, to think about something else, to get up and walk outside, to find the teacher and ask more questions, to do anything but sit there with it. The urge to escape was almost physical, a restlessness in her legs, a clenching in her hands. But she remembered what the teacher had said. So she stayed. She sat with the feeling, the way you might sit beside a fire on a cold night. Not too close. Not running away. Just present. She noticed where the feeling lived in her body. It was in her chest, mostly. A tightness. A weight. Almost like something pressing inward. She noticed the thoughts that came with it. Familiar phrases. Old criticisms. Words she had heard long ago that had somehow taken root and never left. She noticed that the feeling had a texture to it, almost physical, a dull pressure that seemed to pulse with each breath. It was not sharp. It was not unbearable. It was just heavy. And it had been so heavy for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. And then she noticed something she had never noticed before. The more she sat with it, the more it changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but it shifted. The weight moved from her chest to her throat. The tightness eased slightly, then returned, then eased again. The thoughts grew quieter, as if they had been expecting a fight and did not know what to do when none came. The feeling was not a solid block, the way it always seemed when she was running from it. It was moving. It was alive. It was changing all on its own, without her doing anything at all. She sat for a long time. At some point she realized she was no longer afraid of it. She was just watching. Just sitting in the room with it, the way you might sit with rain falling outside a window. You do not try to stop the rain. You just let it rain. When she returned to the teacher the next morning, she looked different. Not transformed, but slightly lighter. Something in her face had softened. "What did you find?" the teacher asked. "It was not what I expected," the young woman said. "When I stopped trying to push it away, it was still unpleasant. But it was not as solid as I thought. It kept changing. And I noticed something else. The pushing away was almost worse than the feeling itself. All that effort to resist it, all that energy spent trying to make it go away, that was exhausting. When I stopped resisting, I felt tired in a different way. A cleaner kind of tired." The teacher smiled. "You have just learned something very important," she said. What the young woman discovered in that quiet room is something Buddhist teachers have been pointing to for centuries. When we resist a feeling, we do not weaken it. We strengthen it. The resistance itself becomes a kind of fuel. There is a simple image that captures this perfectly. Take two playing cards and lean them against each other so they stand upright. Each card supports the other. The pressure of one against the other is what keeps them both standing. If you take one card away, the other falls. Our resistance and our difficult feelings work in exactly the same way. The feeling pushes against us. We push back. And in that pushing back, we are holding the feeling up. We are giving it something to lean on. We think we are fighting it, but we are actually propping it up. Take the resistance away, and the feeling has nothing to lean against. It does not stand on its own. It cannot. It needs our pushing to stay upright. Without it, the card simply falls. This is one of those ideas that sounds too simple to be true. But anyone who has tried it knows that it is. When you stop pushing against sadness, when you truly let it be there, without adding anything to it, the sadness changes. It does not necessarily vanish, but it softens. It moves. It becomes something you can be with rather than something you are at war with. And over time, like any weather, it passes. The same is true for fear, for loneliness, for that feeling of not being enough. Each of these emotions draws much of its power from our resistance to it. We are so busy trying not to feel it that we never give it the space to simply move through us and leave. Think about how this works with loneliness. When loneliness arises, most of us immediately reach for a distraction. We call someone, we scroll through something, we turn on the television, we fill the space with noise because the quiet feels unbearable. But the loneliness does not go away. It waits. And the next time the noise stops, it is right there again, often stronger than before, because it has been compressed, held down, pushed into a smaller and smaller space. But if you let loneliness simply be there, if you sit with it the way the young woman sat with her unworthiness, something surprising often happens. You discover that loneliness has a shape. It has edges. It is not the infinite emptiness it pretends to be. It is a feeling, like any other feeling, with a beginning and a middle, and, eventually, an end. And when you stop running from it, it loses its power to chase you. The same is true for fear. Fear feeds on avoidance. The more we avoid the thing we are afraid of, the larger it grows in our imagination. But when we turn toward it, when we sit quietly with the feeling of being afraid, without trying to escape it, we often find that the fear is smaller than we thought. It is loud, yes. It is uncomfortable, yes. But it is not the monster it appeared to be in the dark. The Buddha spoke about this in the Satipatthana Sutta, one of his most important teachings on awareness. He said that when a painful feeling arises, we should know it as a painful feeling, not push it away, not identify with it, not build a story around it. Just know it. Just see it clearly. There it is. A feeling. And feelings, like all things, pass. There is something deeply kind about this approach, because when we resist our difficult feelings, we are doing something more than just fighting an emotion. We are sending ourselves a message. We are saying, this part of you is not acceptable. This feeling, this experience, this corner of who you are, it is not welcome here. And over time, that message takes a toll. We begin to feel fragmented, incomplete, as if there are rooms in our own house that we are not allowed to enter. We lock the doors on sadness. We board up the windows on fear. We pretend that the room marked loneliness does not exist. And then we wonder why we feel so confined, why our lives feel so narrow, why we cannot quite relax, even in moments that should be peaceful. We end up living in just 2 or 3 rooms of a very large house. The comfortable rooms, the familiar rooms, and all the while, there is an entire home waiting for us, full of rooms we have never sat in, rooms that are not nearly as frightening as we imagine. Buddhist practice invites us to do the opposite, to open every door, to walk into every room, not to redecorate or renovate or fix anything, but simply to enter and be there, to sit in the room called sadness and discover that it is not dangerous, to open the door marked fear and find that it is just a feeling, not a monster, to visit loneliness and realize that it is uncomfortable, yes, but survivable, completely survivable. And as we do this, something begins to happen. We feel more whole, more complete. Not because the difficult feelings disappear, but because we are no longer at war with them. We have stopped fragmenting ourselves. We have gathered all the scattered pieces back together and said, all of this is me. All of this is welcome. In Zen, there is a saying, the whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in one dewdrop on the grass. What this means, in part, is that nothing is excluded. The moon does not choose which dewdrops to appear in. The sky does not withhold itself from certain blades of grass. Everything is included. Everything belongs. Our feelings are like those dewdrops. Each one, pleasant or unpleasant, reflects the whole of our experience. And when we allow them all, when we stop picking and choosing which feelings are acceptable and which are not, we discover something that feels very much like peace. Not the peace of having no problems, but the peace of no longer being at war with ourselves. Let us return to the young woman at the hermitage for a moment. She stayed for several weeks. Each evening, she sat with whatever arose. Some nights the feeling of unworthiness came. Some nights it was sadness. Some nights it was fear. Some nights, surprisingly, it was a kind of gentle happiness that she did not trust at first because she was not used to it. One evening, she came to the teacher with a question. I have been sitting with my feelings every night, she said. And you are right, it does change when I stop pushing. But I want to understand why. Why does resistance make it worse? The teacher thought for a moment. Then she picked up 2 thin pieces of bark from the ground near her feet. She leaned them against each other so they stood upright. What is holding these up? She asked. Each other, the young woman said. And if I take one away? The teacher removed 1 piece of bark. The other fell softly to the ground. Your resistance is one of these pieces of bark, the teacher said. The feeling is the other. You think the feeling is standing on its own, so you push against it to try to knock it down. But you are the one holding it up. Your pushing is what gives it its strength. The young woman looked at the bark lying on the ground. She understood. So when I stop pushing, she said slowly, there is nothing for the feeling to lean against. And it falls on its own, the teacher said. Not because you defeated it, but because you stopped giving it something to fight. The young woman picked up the 2 pieces of bark and leaned them together again. She watched them standing there, perfectly balanced, each one dependent on the other. Then she took one away and watched the other drop. All those years, she said quietly, I was the one keeping it alive. Not on purpose, the teacher said. You were doing what felt natural. When something hurts, we push against it. Every living creature does this. But the heart is not a wound to be bandaged. It is a door to be opened. They sat together in the quiet for a while. The forest sound settled around them. Somewhere in the trees, a bird was singing the same 3 notes, over and over, patient and unhurried. It is strange, the young woman said after a while. I spent years trying to get rid of this feeling, and the answer was to stop trying. The Buddha once said that the root of suffering is resistance, the teacher replied. You were working very hard for a very long time. Now you can rest. This is one of the gentlest truths in all of Buddhist teaching. You do not have to fight your feelings. You do not have to win. You do not have to be stronger than your sadness, or braver than your fear, or tougher than your loneliness. You simply have to be willing to let them be there, to give them a seat in the room, to stop treating them as enemies and start treating them as what they are, passing visitors. temporary guests. The Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh put this beautifully. He said that when a painful feeling arises, we should greet it gently, the way we might greet a familiar guest. Hello, my fear. I see you are here again. Please sit down. I will take care of you. Not with force, not with rejection, just with a simple, steady presence. The feeling is acknowledged. It is allowed. And because it is no longer being fought, it no longer needs to fight back. And when you do this, something changes. Not the feelings themselves, necessarily, though they often soften. What changes is your relationship to them. They are no longer threats. They are no longer proof that something is wrong with you. They are just feelings. They come. They stay for a while. And then, in their own time, they go. They always go. That is the nature of feelings. That is the nature of everything. The struggle in our lives, so often, comes from this quiet war with our own inner weather. We want clear skies all the time. We want to feel good, always. And when something cloudy or cold moves through, we brace against it. We resist. And in doing so, we turn a passing shower into something that lingers far longer than it needed to. Tonight, if something arises that you would rather not feel, see if you can try what the young woman tried. Do not push it away. Do not fix it. Do not argue with it. Just let it be. Let it sit in the room with you. Notice where it lives in your body. Notice how it moves and changes. And notice that you are still here, still breathing, still whole. The feeling did not break you. It was never going to. It was only ever a card leaning against another card. And you can set your card down anytime you choose. Let us rest here for a moment. Notice the weight of your body wherever you are. Notice how your breathing has its own rhythm, steady and sure. There is nothing you need to carry right now. When you are ready, we will go on together. The body is always talking. Right now, wherever you are, it is sending signals. The weight of your head, the temperature of the air on your skin, the places where your body meets the surface beneath it. Most of these signals are so quiet that we do not notice them. They hum along in the background, unremarkable and easy to ignore. But some signals are louder. A stiffness in the neck, a dull ache in the lower back, a knee that protests when you sit too long. These are the signals we notice, and they are the ones most of us would rather not hear, because they are uncomfortable. And our relationship with discomfort is one of the most revealing things about us. In Buddhist practice, physical discomfort is not treated as an obstacle. It is treated as a teacher, not because discomfort is good, and not because there is any virtue in gritting your teeth, but because the way the mind responds to discomfort reveals patterns that are running all the time in every area of our lives, mostly without us noticing. The Buddha called this careful attention to our own experience mindfulness. And one of the first things mindfulness reveals is that we have an enormous number of strategies for avoiding what is uncomfortable. Most of them are so subtle that we do not even know we are using them. They operate below the surface, quietly shaping how we relate to difficulty, not just physical difficulty, but all difficulty. Tonight, we are going to look at some of these strategies, not to judge them, They are very human, very natural, and we all use them. But naming them can be surprisingly freeing. Because once you can see what the mind is doing, you are no longer caught inside it. You are watching it from a slightly wider place. And that wider place is where understanding begins. There is a teaching in Zen that says, not knowing is most intimate. What this means is that when we approach something without assumptions, without a plan, without already knowing what we think about it, we get closer to the truth of it. Our strategies, clever as they are, actually keep us at a distance from our own experience. They are filters between us and what is actually happening. And what we are going to explore now is what happens when we set those filters aside. There is a story about a young monk at a small monastery who was having trouble with his sitting practice. He had been at the monastery for only a few months, and every time he sat down to meditate, his knees ached and his back tightened and his shoulders crept up toward his ears. The discomfort was not severe, but it was persistent, and it filled his attention completely. He could not concentrate on his breathing. He could not settle his mind. All he could think about was the ache in his body. One morning, he went to the abbot, an older monk who had been practicing for many decades. The young monk described his difficulty. "When I sit," he said, "all I can feel is the pain. I have tried everything. I shift my position. I focus harder on the breath. I tell myself it will pass. But nothing works. The pain is all I can think about." The abbot listened carefully. Then he said something the young monk did not expect. "Tell me how you tried to work with it. Not the pain itself, but what your mind did when the pain came." The young monk thought for a moment. "At first, I decided to concentrate on my right knee. I made it my project. I sat down and directed all my attention to the knee, and I tried to breathe into it and soften it and make it release. And what happened? It got worse. Or maybe it did not get worse, but my attention on it made it feel bigger. And I was frustrated because I was working so hard and nothing was changing." The abbot nodded. "This is what we call the project mind," he said. "The mind treats discomfort as a problem to be solved. It creates a goal, the goal of making the pain go away, and then it works very hard toward that goal. But the goal itself is a form of resistance. You are not being with the knee. You are trying to fix it, and the knee could feel the difference." The young monk was quiet. He had not thought of it that way. He had thought he was being attentive, but he could see now that his attention had been pointed, sharp, driven by a purpose. It had not been open or soft or curious. It had been strategic. "What else did you try?" the abbot asked. The young monk described his second approach. "After the project failed," he said, "I tried to make a deal with the pain. I told myself I would pay attention to it for 5 minutes, and if I paid attention honestly, it would ease. So I watched it. But I was watching with one eye on the clock, waiting for my 5 minutes to be up, waiting for the reward." The abbot smiled gently. "Bargaining," he said. "The mind says, 'I will be present with you, but only if you promise to leave.' It is a conditional attention, and the discomfort can feel that too. You are not truly with it. You are enduring it in exchange for something." "And then," the young monk continued, "when the bargaining did not work, I just tried to bear it. I sat very still and very rigid, and I told myself I could take it. I clenched my jaw and held my breath and just endured. Tolerating, said the abbot. This is the Stoic approach. Very common. The body becomes a fortress. The mind becomes a wall. You do not run from the discomfort, but you do not meet it either. You just hold yourself very tightly and wait for it to end. There is a heaviness to this kind of sitting. It is exhausting. The young monk nodded. He knew that heaviness well. Some sittings left him more tired than an entire day of physical work. And there is one more, the abbot said. Did you ever try to look at the discomfort without quite looking at it? Keeping it in the corner of your vision, hoping that if you did not give it your full attention, it might slip away on its own. The young monk stared at him. How did you know? Because everyone does it, the abbot said kindly. It is perhaps the most common strategy of all. The sideways glance. We do not want to face the discomfort fully, so we peek at it. We keep one eye on the breath and one eye on the ache, hoping the ache will lose interest and wander off. But of course, it does not. It stays right where it is, because it does not need our attention to exist. And we stay right where we are, caught between two places, fully present in neither. The young monk sat with all of this for a while. He could see each strategy clearly now, like tools laid out on a table. The project mind, the bargaining, the stoic tolerance, the sideways glance. He had used every one of them, sometimes all in a single sitting, cycling through his repertoire of avoidance without ever realizing that was what he was doing. So what do I do instead? He asked. The abbot was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You do less, much less. Instead of all these strategies, I want you to try something very simple. When the discomfort comes, turn toward it. Not with a plan, not with a goal, not with a bargain or a grimace or a sideways look. Just turn toward it the way you would turn to look at something interesting. With curiosity, with openness, as if you have never felt this particular sensation before and you want to know what it is. That is all? That is everything, the abbot said. That afternoon, the young monk sat down on his cushion and waited. It did not take long. Within a few minutes, the familiar ache in his knee began to build. He felt the old impulse arise, the urge to fix it, to shift, to bargain, to endure. He noticed these impulses and let them pass. And then he did what the abbot had suggested. He turned toward the ache, gently, openly, without any agenda at all. He asked himself a simple question. What does this actually feel like? Not, how do I make it stop? Not, how long will it last? Just what does it feel like, right now, in this moment? And something shifted. The ache, which had always felt like a solid block of unpleasantness, began to reveal itself as something more complex. There was heat in it. There was a pulsing quality. There were moments when it was sharper and moments when it was duller. It was not one thing. It was a constantly changing collection of sensations, rising and falling, shifting and moving, never quite the same from one breath to the next. He noticed that the edges of the sensation were not as clear as he had assumed. The ache in his knee did not stop sharply at a border. It faded gradually into the surrounding area, blending with other sensations, with the warmth of his skin, with the faint tingling of sitting still. It was not a wall of pain. It was more like a watercolor, blending at the edges, softer than it looked from a distance. And he noticed that his fear of the discomfort had been much larger than the discomfort itself. The story in his mind, "This is terrible. I cannot stand this. I need it to stop," had been louder than the actual sensation. When he set the story aside and just felt what was there, it was manageable. Unpleasant, yes, but manageable. He could be with it. He could even be interested in it. There was a moment, about halfway through the sitting, when something in him relaxed. Not the knee. The knee was still doing what it was doing, but something around the knee, something in the mind, released its grip. It was as if he had been holding his breath for months without knowing it, and had finally exhaled. The discomfort did not disappear, but the struggle around it did. And without the struggle, the discomfort was just another sensation, no different in kind from the feeling of his hands resting in his lap or the air moving through his nostrils. He sat for the entire period. When the bell rang, he opened his eyes and noticed something. He felt calm, not because the discomfort had disappeared. Parts of it were still there, but because something in him had shifted. He had stopped fighting and started looking. And looking, it turned out, was enough. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "It is better to travel well than to arrive." The young monk was beginning to understand what this meant. The practice was not about getting rid of discomfort. It was about changing how he traveled with it. This discovery matters far beyond a cushion in a monastery. Because the strategies the young monk used with his knee, the project mind, the bargaining, the white-knuckled endurance, the sideways glance, these are the same strategies we use with every kind of difficulty in our lives. When something uncomfortable arises at work, we often go into project mode. We try to fix it, manage it, solve it, make it go away. And sometimes that is appropriate. But sometimes the situation does not need fixing. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. When a relationship becomes uncomfortable, we bargain. "I will be patient for now, but things had better change soon." We set conditions on our presence. We stay, but only provisionally. And the other person can usually sense that our attention is conditional, that we have one foot out the door. When life becomes heavy, we sometimes just endure. We grit our teeth and push through. We tell ourselves we are strong, we can handle it. But endurance without openness is exhausting. It drains us slowly, and it does not lead to understanding. It just leads to a deeper kind of tiredness, the tiredness that comes from holding on too tightly for too long. And when something is too uncomfortable to face directly, we glance at it sideways. We acknowledge it just enough to say we are aware of it, but we never quite look at it fully. We keep it at the edge of our vision, hoping it will resolve itself without us having to engage. How many difficult conversations have we avoided this way? How many feelings have we kept at arm's length, never quite looked at, never quite let go of? The Buddhist teaching here is not that these strategies are wrong. They are human. They are natural. They are how we survive. But they are not how we understand. Understanding comes from turning toward what is difficult, not with force or ambition, but with the gentle curiosity the abbot described. What does this actually feel like? What is here, right now, when I stop adding my stories and my strategies? The Buddha himself spent years trying various forms of resistance before he found the middle way. He tried extreme discipline, He tried force. He tried enduring. None of it brought him closer to understanding. What brought him closer was simple, direct awareness. Just looking, just seeing, just being present with what is, without any agenda about what it should become. There is a Zen saying, "The obstacle is the path." This does not mean we should go looking for difficulty. It means that when difficulty finds us, which it always does, it is not a detour from our practice. It is the practice itself. Every moment of discomfort, whether physical or emotional, is an invitation to look more closely, to meet what is here with something softer than resistance. The young monk continued to practice in this new way. Over the weeks that followed, he noticed something surprising. His relationship with discomfort began to change. Not because the discomfort went away. His knees still ached. His back still tightened. But the ache and the tightness no longer alarmed him. They were just sensations. Interesting, shifting, temporary sensations. They came. They changed. They passed. And he watched them with a growing steadiness that surprised him. He noticed something else too. The same steadiness began to show up in the rest of his life. When a task was tedious, he could stay with it without restlessness. When another monk said something careless, he could feel the sting without closing down around it. When a day did not go as planned, he could let it be what it was, without spiraling into frustration. The muscle he had been building on the cushion, the ability to be with what is uncomfortable without flinching, was a muscle that worked everywhere. The abbot had told him this would happen. The cushion is just the training ground, he had said. But the training is for everything. This is one of the quiet gifts of learning to be with discomfort. It makes us wider. Not harder, not tougher, not more stoic, but wider. Able to hold more of life without pulling away. Think of the difference between a narrow stream and a wide river. The same amount of water that would overwhelm the stream flows easily through the river. The water has not changed, but the space it moves through has. When we become wider, the difficulties of life still arrive, but they move through us more easily. They do not overwhelm. They do not flood the banks. There is room for them. The range of what we can be present for expands, and as it expands, the world becomes a less frightening place. Not because the world has changed, but because we have. There is more space inside us, more room for whatever comes. The Buddha spoke about this expansion as a quality of the awakened mind. He described it as boundless, a mind that can hold joy and sorrow, pleasure and discomfort, ease and difficulty, without contracting around any of it. In the Metta Sutta, he described a mind without hostility or ill will, a mind that meets each experience with openness rather than resistance. Not because the mind is numb or indifferent, but because it is wide enough to hold it all. That kind of spaciousness is available to each of us. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually, one moment of gentle attention at a time. Each time we turn toward what is difficult, instead of away from it, the mind opens a little more. Each time we meet discomfort with curiosity instead of fear, the space inside grows a little wider. It is slow work, but it is real work, and it changes everything. Let us settle here. You can let your body soften a little wherever it is held. You can let your jaw relax, your shoulders drop. There is nothing you need to brace for. When it feels natural, we will move on together. There is almost certainly someone in your life who is difficult to be around. Someone whose habits bother you, whose voice grates, whose way of moving through the world rubs against your own. You may know exactly who it is. You may have thought of them already. This is one of the most universal human experiences. We can love the whole world in theory and still find one particular person nearly impossible to be with. And when we are around that person, something happens inside us. We tighten. We close. We build a wall, sometimes without even realizing we are doing it. Something in us simply contracts, and suddenly we are no longer open and present. We are defended. In Buddhist teaching, our relationships with difficult people are not obstacles to our practice. They are some of the most valuable parts of it. The Buddha taught that compassion, true compassion, is not something we feel only for people who are easy to love. It is something we learn to extend to everyone, including, and perhaps especially, the people who challenge us most. This is not easy, and it is not something we can force, but there is a way of understanding difficult people that can shift the whole picture gently and naturally, without requiring us to pretend we feel something we do not. There is a story about two monks who lived at the same small monastery in the hills. The monastery was quiet and orderly. There were only a dozen monks, and they shared the daily work of cooking, cleaning, gardening, and maintaining the grounds. For the most part, they lived in harmony. But there was one monk, a man who had come to the monastery a few years earlier, who was difficult. His name is not important. What matters is how he moved through the world. He was loud where others were quiet. He was abrupt where others were gentle. He interrupted conversations. He criticized other people's work. He ate noisily. He left things untidy. He had a habit of offering unsolicited opinions about everyone else's practice, and his opinions were rarely kind. Most of the monks had learned to let it go. They smiled and nodded and kept their distance. But there was one younger monk who could not. Everything about the difficult monk bothered him. Every noise, every comment, every careless gesture landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through his whole day. He tried to be patient. He tried to remember his training. He reminded himself of the Buddha's teachings on equanimity and loving kindness. But none of it touched the irritation he felt. It was physical, almost. A tightness in his chest whenever the other monk entered the room. A sharpness in his thoughts. A constant, low hum of annoyance that colored his entire experience at the monastery. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating encounter in the kitchen, the younger monk went to the abbess. She was a woman of few words, but when she spoke, people listened. "I need your help," he said. "I cannot stand him. I know I am supposed to be compassionate. I know I am supposed to be patient, but I feel nothing but irritation when he is near. I have tried everything." The abbess poured tea and said nothing for a long time. Then she asked a simple question. "What do you see when you look at him?" The younger monk answered immediately. "I see someone who is rude, who is careless, who disrupts the peace of this place." "Yes," said the abbess. "That is what you see on the surface. That is the level you are living on with him. Now, I want to ask you something else. Why do you think a person behaves that way?" The younger monk had not considered this. He had spent so much time reacting to the behavior that he had never once wondered about its cause. The behavior was the whole picture for him. The rudeness, the noise, the carelessness, that was who this man was. But the abbess was inviting him to look beneath the surface, to drop down from the level of behavior to something deeper. Think about it, she said. What kind of inner life would produce the behavior you are describing? What would a person have to be feeling inside to act the way he acts? The younger monk sat with the question, and for the first time, something shifted. He thought about the loud voice, and he wondered if it came from someone who felt unheard. He thought about the critical comments, and he wondered if they came from someone who felt insufficient himself. He thought about the carelessness and the abruptness, and he wondered if they came from someone who had never been shown gentleness, who had never learned it, because no one had offered it to him. People who are at peace do not behave this way, the abbess said quietly. A person who is truly at ease in themselves does not need to criticize others or fill every silence with noise. When someone behaves in a way that is abrasive or hurtful, it is almost always because they are carrying a great deal of discomfort inside themselves. They may not know it. They may not be able to name it. But the discomfort is there, and it comes out in the ways you have described. The younger monk was quiet. He could feel something loosening in his chest. Not a rush of compassion, exactly, but a softening, a slight shift in perspective, as if he had been looking at a painting from very close and had just taken a step back and could now see more of it. So what do I do? He asked. You drop down a level, the abbess said. When you look at him and all you can see is the behavior, the rudeness, the noise, you are living on the surface. And on the surface, the only responses available to you are irritation and defense. But if you can drop down from the behavior to the suffering that causes it, a different response becomes possible. Not forced, not manufactured, but a natural response to someone in pain. She paused, and then she said something that stayed with the younger monk for a long time. Imagine you are standing on a pier, looking at the ocean. The surface is choppy. It is rough and turbulent and unpleasant to look at. If you stay on the pier, all you will ever see is the chop. But if you could go beneath the surface, even just a few feet, you would find that the water is much calmer there. The turbulence is only on the surface. It does not go all the way down. People are the same way, she continued. The behavior you find so difficult, that is the choppy surface. But underneath it, there is a person who is not fundamentally different from you. A person who wants to be happy and does not know how. A person who does not want to suffer, but does not know how to stop. When you can see that person, the one beneath the waves, the irritation becomes very hard to maintain. The younger monk sat with this for a while. It was a lot to take in. He had spent months building a solid picture of the difficult monk as someone who was simply rude, inconsiderate, thoughtless, and now the abbess was suggesting that this picture was incomplete, that it was a portrait painted from one angle only, and that from a different angle, the picture might look very different. I am not asking you to excuse his behavior, the abbess added gently, as if she could read his thoughts. Difficult behavior is still difficult. If he is unkind, that is unkind, and it is reasonable to feel the sting of it. But there is a difference between feeling the sting and building a wall. The sting is natural. The wall is a choice. This is one of the most practical and compassionate teachings in Buddhism. It does not ask us to like everyone. It does not ask us to pretend that difficult behavior is acceptable. It does not ask us to be doormats or to endure things that are harmful. It simply asks us to look at what is beneath the surface. The Buddha taught this directly. He said that all harmful behavior, every act of aggression, every unkind word, every moment of carelessness, arises from suffering. Suffering is the root. If a person were truly at peace, truly free from inner turmoil, they would not need to act in ways that cause harm. The behavior is a symptom. The suffering is the cause. And when we can see the cause, when we can look past the symptom and into the suffering that drives it, something remarkable happens. Our irritation begins to shift. Not because we force it to. Not because we tell ourselves we should be more compassionate, but because the natural response to seeing someone in pain is compassion. It arises on its own, the way warmth arises when you step into the sun. You do not have to manufacture it. You just have to put yourself in the right position. The position is this: instead of looking at what someone is doing, we look at what they are feeling. Instead of reacting to the surface, we open to the depth. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "Hatred is never ended by hatred, but by love." This is an ancient and eternal law. This is not a sentimental idea. It is a description of how the mind actually works. When we meet someone's difficult behavior with irritation, we add to the conflict. When we meet it with understanding, we begin to dissolve it. Not the other person's behavior necessarily. We cannot control that. But the conflict inside ourselves, the wall we have built, the contraction in our chest, that begins to ease. The younger monk tried what the abbess suggested. It did not happen overnight. For the first few days, he noticed himself falling back into the old pattern. The difficult monk would do something annoying, and the irritation would rise automatically before he even had time to think. But gradually, he began to catch himself. He would notice the irritation arising, and before it took over, he would pause. He would ask himself, what is this person feeling right now? What kind of discomfort is behind this behavior? He did not know the answers. He was guessing. He did not know the difficult monk's history or his inner life. But the act of asking the question changed everything. Because the question moved his attention from the surface to the depth, from what the person was doing to what the person might be carrying. And once his attention moved, his body followed. The tightness in his chest began to ease. The sharpness in his thoughts began to soften. Not because he had decided to feel compassion. He had not decided anything. It was more like turning a corner and finding a view he did not expect. And as he practiced this, he began to notice things he had never seen before. He noticed that the difficult monk often ate alone. He noticed that when the other monks laughed together, the difficult monk watched from a distance with an expression that was not quite anger but something closer to longing. He noticed that the critical comments usually came after moments when the difficult monk had been ignored or excluded. There was a pattern here, and once he saw it, he could not unsee it. None of this excused the behavior, but it explained it. And understanding, even partial understanding, even the kind of understanding that is mostly guesswork and intuition, changed the quality of his response. Where there had been a wall, there was now a window. He could still see the behavior, but he could also see through it to something underneath. And what was underneath was not a bad person. It was a person carrying something heavy, a person who had not yet learned how to set it down. One day, the younger monk was working in the garden. The afternoon sun was warm, and the soil was damp, and the work was quiet and steady. The difficult monk came by and, as usual, made a critical remark about the way the rows were spaced. The younger monk felt the familiar sting. His jaw tightened. The old reflex began, the urge to defend, to fire back, to build the wall a little higher. But this time, he paused. He looked at the other man, and he saw, just for a moment, the loneliness in his eyes. He saw a man who did not know how to connect except by criticizing. A man who probably wanted to help but did not know how to offer without finding fault first. "Would you like to help?" the younger monk asked. The difficult monk looked surprised. His expression shifted. Something in his face opened, just slightly, just for a moment, before his usual guardedness returned. "The spacing is still wrong," he said. But he knelt down in the dirt and began to work alongside him. They did not talk much. They worked side by side in the warm afternoon, pulling weeds, pressing seeds into the soil, patting down the earth. It was not a dramatic moment. No one changed. No one was healed. But something had shifted between them. The wall had a door in it now, and the door was open, even if only a crack. This teaching, the practice of dropping down a level, is not limited to the people who bother us most. It can change any relationship, because everyone we meet is carrying something we cannot see. The person who cuts in line, the colleague who sends a sharp email, the family member who says the wrong thing at the wrong time. Each of them is operating from a place that we do not have full access to. Each of them has an inner life that is invisible to us, full of pressures and fears and old wounds that shape their behavior in ways even they may not understand. The Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, wrote about this with great tenderness. He said that when we are angry at someone, we should think of them as a person who is suffering. When you look at the other person, he wrote, you see her suffering, and you no longer want to punish or blame. Compassion is born in your heart. This is not about being passive. There are times when we need to set boundaries. There are times when we need to step back from someone whose behavior is genuinely harmful. The Buddha himself acknowledged this. He told his monks that certain situations are not suitable for certain people, and that wisdom sometimes means knowing when to move away. Compassion does not mean absorbing everything. It means seeing clearly and responding from that clarity. But in the many ordinary, daily encounters where someone rubs us the wrong way, the practice of dropping down a level is transformative. It does not change the other person. It changes us. It opens a door that irritation keeps locked. And through that door, we discover something that has been there all along. The ability to meet another human being with our hearts open, even when they make it difficult. The Zen tradition has a phrase for this. See the Buddha in everyone. It does not mean that everyone behaves like a Buddha. Far from it. It means that in every person, no matter how difficult, there is the same basic nature. The same capacity for suffering. The same longing for peace. The same tender, vulnerable humanity that we carry ourselves. It is there in the person who irritates us. It is there in the person who speaks too sharply. It is there in the person we would rather avoid. And the remarkable thing is that we do not have to see it perfectly. We do not have to see it all the time. We just have to see it once, even briefly, even imperfectly. And something begins to change. The next time the difficult person does the difficult thing, there is a small hesitation before the wall goes up. A small opening. A moment where we remember that beneath the choppy surface, the water is calmer. That moment is enough. It does not need to be grand. It does not need to be a rush of warmth or a dramatic forgiveness. It can be as small and simple as a pause, a breath, a quiet question. What might this person be carrying? When we can ask that question, the struggle in our relationships begins to soften. Not because we have solved anything, but because we have shifted where we are looking. We have dropped down a level, and down there, beneath the noise and the friction and the irritation, there is something shared, something human, something that, once seen, makes it very hard to keep the wall standing. Let us be still for a moment. There is no one you need to fix or forgive right now. Just this breath, just this quiet. And when the stillness has settled, we will continue on. Imagine, for a moment, that you are lying on your back in an open field on a clear night. The grass is cool beneath you. The air is still. And above you, the entire sky is filled with stars. Thousands of them, more than you could ever count. Scattered across the darkness in every direction. Some bright, some faint, some clustered together, some standing alone. As you look up, your eyes find a familiar pattern. A group of stars arranged in the shape of a ladle or a cup with a long handle. You have seen it many times. You recognize it instantly. And without thinking about it, your mind draws invisible lines between those stars, connecting them, separating them from all the others, and you see the shape clearly. It feels solid. It feels real. It feels like it is obviously there. But here is a question worth sitting with. Is it actually there? The stars are there, certainly. Each one is a real point of light, burning in the sky. But the shape, the pattern, the thing we call a constellation, that exists only in the mind. We drew the lines. We chose those particular stars out of thousands. We gave the pattern a name. And once we named it, we started seeing it as a thing. A fixed, solid thing that lives in the sky. But there is no shape in the sky. There are only stars. The shape is something we added. This is a small observation, and it might seem like a minor point. But in Buddhist teaching, it leads to one of the deepest and most freeing insights a person can have. Because the same thing that is true of the constellation is true of something much closer to home. It is true of the self. In Zen Buddhism, there is a tradition of asking questions that cannot be answered by thinking. These questions are called koans, and their purpose is to push the mind beyond its usual habits into a kind of seeing that goes deeper than concepts. One of the most famous koans is simply this: who are you? Not your name, not your job, not your history, not the roles you play or the stories you tell about yourself. Who are you underneath all of that? Most of us have never seriously asked this question. We move through our days with a strong, steady sense of being someone. I am this person. I have these qualities. I like these things. I dislike those things. This is my body. These are my thoughts. This is my life. The sense of being a self, a solid, continuous I at the center of experience, is so constant and so familiar that questioning it seems almost absurd. Of course I am someone. Of course I am here. The Buddha looked at this very carefully. He looked more carefully than almost anyone in human history. And what he found was surprising. He found that the self, this thing we feel so certain about, is constructed in much the same way as a constellation. It is real as a pattern, but it is not a solid, fixed thing. It is something the mind builds, moment by moment, out of constantly changing pieces. This teaching is called anatta in the Buddhist tradition. It is sometimes translated as no self, but that translation can be misleading. It is not that nothing exists. It is not that you are an illusion and the world is empty. It is more like discovering that the Big Dipper is a concept, not a thing. The stars are still there. The sky is still there. You are still there. But the fixed, solid shape you thought you saw is something your mind was adding to the picture. Let us explore how this works. Right now, there are many things happening in your experience. You can feel your body. You can hear sounds, perhaps the hum of a room, perhaps the quiet of a night. There are thoughts moving through your mind. There are feelings, maybe calm, maybe restless, maybe something in between. There is the sensation of breathing. All of these things are arising and passing, moment by moment, each one giving way to the next. Now, notice what happens when one of these experiences feels particularly vivid. A thought arises, maybe a memory or a plan, and the mind says, "My thought." A feeling of tiredness comes, and the mind says, "I am tired." A sensation of warmth appears in the hands, and the mind says, "My hands are warm." That tiny word, "my," is doing something very interesting. It is drawing a line. It is connecting the experience to a central point, to an I that owns it. My thought, my body, my tiredness, my hands. In that moment of claiming, of adding the my, the self is created. Not found, created. The mind draws a line between the experience and a center, and in that line, the sense of self appears. The Buddha saw this with great precision. He saw that the self is not a thing that has experiences. It is the act of claiming experiences. It is the drawing of lines, over and over, thousands of times a day, connecting each passing event to an imaginary center. And because this happens so quickly, so automatically, so far below our awareness, it creates the illusion of something solid and continuous, something that has been here all along, something that will always be here. Consider how many times a day this happens. My breakfast, my commute, my mood, my afternoon, my worry, my plan, my evening. Every experience gets tagged, gets claimed, gets drawn into the constellation, and each tag reinforces the sense that there is someone at the center doing all of this. A fixed point around which everything orbits. But the fixed point is the one thing that cannot be found. Look for it and it slips away. Try to point to the self and you will find a thought or a sensation or a feeling, but never the self itself. It is always one step behind the looking. Always implied but never located. It is, as the Buddhist teachers say, like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The looking cannot find the looker. And yet, when we stop looking, when we stop trying to pin it down, everything continues perfectly well. The breathing continues. The hearing continues. Life goes on. Nothing collapses. The stars keep shining whether we draw the constellation or not. There is a story about a student who came to a Buddhist teacher with a question that had been troubling her for weeks. She was a thoughtful person, the kind who turned ideas over in her mind for a long time before speaking, and this question had been with her through many quiet evenings. "I understand the teaching about impermanence," she said. "I can see that everything changes. My body changes. My thoughts change. My feelings change. Nothing stays the same. But if everything is changing, then what am I? If there is no fixed self, then who is sitting here talking to you?" The teacher listened. Then she said, "Come outside with me." They walked out into the evening. The sky was just darkening. A few stars were beginning to appear. "Do you see the stars?" the teacher asked. "Yes." "Do you see any shapes among them?" The student looked up. "I see the usual patterns," she said. "The ones I learned as a child." "Good," said the teacher. "Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that you have never been taught any of those patterns. No one ever pointed to those stars and told you they were a shape. You are seeing the sky for the very first time. What would you see?" The student was quiet for a moment. "I would see stars," she said. "Just stars, scattered everywhere. No shapes. And would anything be missing?" "No. The stars would all still be there." "Exactly," said the teacher. "The stars do not disappear when you remove the concept. The concept was something you were adding. The stars were always just stars." She paused to let this settle. "You are asking who you are, if there is no fixed self. But look at this sky. When you remove the concept of the constellation, do the stars vanish? Do they stop shining? Is the sky suddenly empty? No. It is the same with you. When we say there is no fixed self, we are not saying that nothing is here. Everything is here. The body is here. The breath is here. Sensations are here. Thoughts are here. Feelings are here. All of it is vivid and alive. We are simply saying that the fixed shape, the solid I that you thought was holding it all together, is a concept. It is a set of lines drawn between the stars. And when you see that the lines are added, not found, you do not lose anything. The stars keep shining. You just see them more clearly. The student stood looking up at the sky for a long time. The darkness had deepened. More stars had appeared. The sky was enormous. "But it does not feel like a concept," she said. "It feels like the most real thing in the world. This sense of being me." "Of course it does," the teacher said. "A constellation looks real too. You have been looking at it your whole life. Everyone around you sees the same pattern. Your parents pointed it out to you when you were small. It has a name. It is on maps. How could it not feel real? So how do I see past it?" You do not need to see past it. You just need to see it for what it is. A pattern. A useful, beautiful, familiar pattern. But a pattern, not a thing. And when you can hold it that way, lightly, the way you might hold a leaf in your open hand rather than clenching it in your fist, then everything becomes a little easier, a little lighter, a little more free. This can be a difficult teaching to grasp, and the Buddhist tradition does not pretend otherwise. The sense of self is the most deeply rooted pattern in the human mind. It is the lens through which we see everything. Asking someone to question it is like asking a fish to notice water. It is everywhere. It is always there. It is so constant that it becomes invisible. But there are moments, usually quiet ones, when the pattern loosens on its own. You may have experienced this. A moment when you were so absorbed in something, a piece of music, a sunset, a conversation, the play of light on water, that the usual sense of I faded into the background. There was just the experience, just the listening, just the seeing, just the being present. No one watching, no one commenting, no one standing at the center of it saying, "This is mine." You may have felt it while watching a fire or sitting by a river or listening to rain. The thinking mind quieted, and what remained was simply awareness. Open, clear, unbounded. Not awareness of something in particular, just awareness itself. Those moments tend to feel remarkably peaceful. There is a lightness to them, a spaciousness. The world seems to open up, as if a window has been cleaned, and things appear a little brighter, a little more vivid than usual. And then the moment passes, the eye returns, the familiar commentary starts up again, and the usual weight settles back in. Most of us think of those moments as pleasant accidents. Nice when they happen, but not something we can understand or cultivate. But in Zen practice, these moments are treated differently. They are not seen as rare gifts or mystical experiences. They are seen as glimpses of how things actually are, all the time, beneath the layers of concept. The self was never as solid as it seemed. It was always a pattern, always a concept, always a set of lines drawn between stars. Those quiet moments when it fades are not moments when something is taken away. They are moments when we see what was always there underneath. There is another image from the Buddhist tradition that helps with this. Imagine someone holding a torch on a dark night. The torch has a flame at the top, bright and clear. Now imagine this person begins to spin the torch in a circle, very quickly, arm extended, the flame whipping through the dark air. What do you see? You see a circle of fire, a glowing ring hanging in the darkness. It looks solid. It looks real. You could point to it and say, there is a circle. But is there a circle? No. There is a flame, moving very quickly. There is a single point of light, tracing a path through the air. The circle is an illusion created by speed. If your eyes were fast enough, you would not see a circle at all. You would see exactly what is there, a single flame, moving from one position to the next, never in two places at once. The Buddha used this kind of image to describe how the sense of self is created. The mind and body are a rapidly changing process. Sensations arise and pass. Thoughts appear and disappear. Emotions bloom and fade. Sounds come and go. Each moment is new. Each moment is different from the one before. But because this process moves so quickly, because one experience follows another with barely a gap between them, it creates the appearance of something continuous, something solid, something that endures. We look at this rapidly spinning process and we see a self, a fixed I that persists through time. But what is actually happening is much more like the flame. A single point of experience, arising and passing, moment after moment, creating the appearance of continuity through sheer speed. This is not a frightening idea. even though it might sound like one at first. Nothing is being taken away. The flame is still real. The light is still bright. The warmth is still warm. Everything you experience right now, the weight of your body, the sound of these words, the feeling in your chest, all of it is completely real. It is just not owned by anyone. It does not belong to a fixed self any more than the stars belong to a constellation. It belongs to the moment, and the moment is always new. There is a question that sometimes arises when people hear this teaching. If there is no fixed self, then how does anything hold together? How do I remember yesterday? How do I recognize my own face? How is there any continuity at all? The Buddhist answer is elegant. There is continuity, but it is the continuity of process, not of a thing. Think of a candle. A candle burns through the night. In the morning we say it is the same candle, but the flame that burns at dawn is not the same flame that burned at dusk. The wax has changed. The wick has shortened. The heat, the light, the shape of the flame, all of it is different. And yet there is an unbroken continuity, because each moment of the candle's burning conditions the next. The flame at midnight arises because of the flame at 11. The flame at 11 arises because of the flame at 10. There is a chain of cause and effect, each moment giving rise to the next, without anything solid being carried through. Or think of a river. You can visit a river today and return in a year, and you would call it the same river. But not a single drop of water is the same. The banks may have shifted. The depth may have changed. Everything about it is different, and yet the river continues. It continues not because something is preserved unchanged, but because each moment flows naturally into the next. We are like this. Each thought conditions the next thought. Each experience shapes the one that follows. There is pattern. There is continuity. There is memory and habit and personality. The person who wakes up tomorrow morning will feel like the same person who went to sleep tonight, and in a practical sense, that is fine. There is nothing wrong with using the word I. There is nothing wrong with having a name, a history, a sense of who you are. The Buddha himself used the word I. He spoke of his past and his future. He was not asking anyone to stop functioning as a person. What he was pointing to is subtler than that. He was saying that when we mistake the pattern for a solid thing, when we grip the concept of self too tightly, we create suffering for ourselves. Because a concept cannot protect us. A concept cannot make us safe. And the tighter we hold it, the more vulnerable we feel when life threatens to change it. But there is no solid core being carried through. There is just the flow. Moment after moment after moment, each one arising from what came before, each one giving rise to what comes next. And the whole thing moves so beautifully, so seamlessly, that it creates the appearance of someone standing still at the center of it all. The Buddha did not teach this to frighten anyone or to make life seem empty. He taught it because he saw that the concept of a fixed self is the root of an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering. When there is a strong sense of I, there is also a strong sense of mine. And where there is mine, there is the fear of loss. My body, my health, my relationships, my success, my reputation. Each my is a thread tied to the self, and each thread can be pulled, and each pull brings suffering. But when the self is seen as a pattern rather than a thing, something loosens. Not everything at once, not dramatically, but gently, Gradually, the grip relaxes. The thoughts still come, but they are not so heavy. The feelings still arise, but they pass more easily. The experiences of life, pleasant and unpleasant, continue to flow, but there is less clinging, less grasping, less of that tight, contracted sense of holding on. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "Those who cling to nothing as mine, and grieve not for what does not exist, they are truly called monks." This is not about renouncing the world or giving up everything you love. It is about holding things lightly, enjoying what is here without clutching it, letting each moment be what it is, without needing to own it. The stars keep shining whether we draw lines between them or not. The sky is no less beautiful without the constellation, and you are no less real, no less vivid, no less alive, without the concept of a fixed self. If anything, the opposite is true. When the concept loosens, what remains is more vivid, more present, more awake. The student standing in the field that evening did not become nobody. She became more fully what she already was. A breathing, feeling, changing, living process, connected to everything around her, no longer needing to defend the borders of a self that was never really bordered in the first place. The stars above her were just stars, and she was just this breath, this feeling, this moment. And that was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything. Let us rest here for a while. This is a teaching that does not need to be understood all at once. It is a seed. It can sit quietly in the mind, and in its own time, it will begin to open. For now, just let yourself breathe. Just let yourself be here, exactly as you are. And when it feels right, we will continue. There is a particular feeling that comes with being right. A solidity, a certainty, a warmth that settles in the chest and says, "Yes, I know how this is. I see it clearly, and the person who disagrees with me does not." It is one of the most satisfying feelings in the world. And, according to the Buddhist tradition, it is one of the most dangerous. Not because opinions are wrong. We all have them. They are a natural part of how we make sense of the world. The danger is not in the having. It is in the holding. It is in how tightly we grip our way of seeing things, and how quickly that grip turns into a wall between ourselves and everyone who sees things differently. The Buddha listed attachment to views as one of the deepest sources of conflict in human life. Not greed, not hatred. Attachment to views. The conviction that my way of seeing is the correct way, and that anyone who sees differently is mistaken. He placed it alongside craving and the sense of self as one of the great chains that bind us. And if you think about the amount of conflict in the world, between people, between communities, between nations, it is hard to argue with him. There is a story about a Buddhist teacher who lived in a small monastery near a wide lake. The monastery was known for the quality of its teaching and the steadiness of its practice. Students came from many places to study there, and most of them got along well. But one autumn, a disagreement arose between two students that threatened to unsettle the whole community. The disagreement was about something simple. The two students, a young man and a young woman, had been given the same assignment. The teacher had asked them each to walk to the lake at dawn, sit quietly for an hour, and then return and describe what they had experienced. It was a common exercise at this monastery, a way of developing attention and clear seeing. The next evening, the students gathered in the hall and the two gave their reports. The young man went first. "The lake was still," he said. "Perfectly still. There was no wind. The surface was like glass. I could see the trees reflected in the water, every branch and every leaf. It was as if there were two worlds, one above and one below, identical in every way. The stillness was extraordinary." The young woman shook her head. "That is not what I saw," she said. "The lake was alive. There were small ripples everywhere. Fish were rising near the shore. A bird landed on the water and sent circles spreading outward. The reeds were swaying. It was full of movement and life." "You must have been at a different lake," the young man said. "I was at the same lake," she replied. "I sat on the eastern shore near the reeds." "I sat on the western shore," he said, "where the bank is high and the water is deep and sheltered." They looked at each other. Both were certain. Both had paid careful attention. Both had seen clearly. And what they had seen was completely different. "You were not really paying attention," the young man said. "I was paying more attention than you," the young woman replied. And there it was. The small, familiar turning point where a difference of perspective becomes a disagreement, and a disagreement becomes a conflict, and a conflict becomes personal. Each one sure of what they had seen. Each one beginning to question not just the other's observation, but the other's competence, the other's sincerity, the other's character. The teacher had been listening from the back of the hall. He let the exchange continue for a moment longer, then spoke quietly. "You are both right," he said. The students turned to look at him. "The western shore is sheltered. The water there is deep and calm. On a still morning, it is a mirror. The eastern shore is shallow. The reeds grow there. Fish feed in the shallows. The water moves. On the same morning, at the same hour, one side of the lake is still and the other side is alive with movement." He paused. "You each saw the lake truly. The problem is not what you saw. The problem is the next step. The step where you decided that what you saw was the whole lake." The hall was quiet. The two students looked at each other and then down at their hands. The young woman spoke first. "But I was paying such careful attention," she said. "I sat there for an hour. I watched everything." "You watched everything you could see from where you sat," the teacher said gently. "And you watched it beautifully. But the eastern shore is not the western shore. And the western shore is not the eastern shore. The lake is bigger than either of your views of it." He let this settle for a moment. Then he said, "This is what attachment to views does. It does not make us wrong. Very often, we are seeing something real, something true, but we are seeing it from one shore. And we are so convinced by the clarity of our own vision that we cannot believe there is another shore with an equally clear and completely different view." He looked at both students with great warmth. "The clarity is not the problem," he said. "The certainty is the problem. Clarity and certainty feel like the same thing, but they are not. Clarity is seeing what is in front of you. Certainty is believing that what is in front of you is all there is." This is one of the most practical teachings in Buddhism because it applies to nearly every conflict we find ourselves in. Arguments with family, disagreements with colleagues, political divisions, the debates that run through our communities and our cultures. In almost every case, the conflict is not between someone who is right and someone who is wrong. It is between two people standing on different shores, each seeing truly, each unable to see what the other sees. The Buddha was very clear about this. He taught that our views are conditioned. They are shaped by where we come from, how we were raised, what we have experienced, what we have been taught. Two people can look at the same situation and see entirely different things, not because one is smart and the other is foolish, but because they are standing in different places. Their conditioning is different. Their shore is different. And from each shore, the lake looks different. Consider how thoroughly conditioned our views are. If you had been born in a different country, to different parents, speaking a different language, surrounded by different customs and beliefs, you would hold many different opinions than the ones you hold now. Not because your current opinions are wrong, but because opinions are shaped by context. They are products of a particular time, a particular place, a particular set of experiences, and so are everyone else's. We are all standing on the shore we happen to arrive at, and from each shore, the view is real, but partial. This is worth sitting with, because most of us do not experience our opinions this way. We experience them as truths, not as perspectives, not as views from a particular shore, but as accurate descriptions of how things actually are. And when someone disagrees, it feels not like they are standing on a different shore, but like they are denying reality, our reality. And that feels threatening. In the Kalama Sutta, one of his most well-known discourses, the Buddha offered remarkable advice to a group of villagers who were confused by the many different teachers passing through their town, each teaching something different. He told them not to accept anything simply because it is tradition, or because a teacher says it, or because it is written in a text, or because it seems logical. When you know for yourselves, he said, these things are wholesome, these things are blameless, these things lead to benefit and happiness, then you should accept them and live by them. This is not a teaching about having no views. It is a teaching about holding views lightly, about recognizing that even our most cherished understanding is a view from one shore, and that somewhere else, someone is looking at the same lake and seeing something we cannot see from where we stand. The difficult part of this teaching is not understanding it. The difficult part is applying it to ourselves. We can hear the idea that attachment to views causes conflict, and we can nod wisely, and in the very same moment, we can be tightly clutching our own views without noticing. This is what the Buddhist teachers mean when they say that self-knowledge is the hardest knowledge. It is easy to see attachment in other people. It is very difficult to see it in ourselves. We are always standing on our own shore, and from our own shore, our view always looks complete. Think about a time when you were in a disagreement with someone you care about. Not a small disagreement about where to eat or what to watch, but a real disagreement about something that mattered to you. Notice how it felt in your body. There was probably a tightening, a bracing, a heat in the chest or the belly. The mind sharpened. Words came faster. There was an urgency to being heard, to being understood, to being acknowledged as correct. That urgency is attachment. It is the grip tightening around a view. And in that grip, something is lost. The ability to listen. The ability to be curious about the other person's perspective. The ability to hold the possibility that you might be seeing only one shore of a very large lake. Notice, too, how the mind behaves when someone changes their view to agree with ours. There is a rush of satisfaction, a warmth, a sense of victory. And notice how the mind behaves when someone holds firm to a different view. There is frustration, tightness, a sense of something being wrong. These reactions are not about truth. They are about attachment. They are about the grip, not the view. Because if it were truly about truth, we would be equally happy to discover that we were wrong, since that would bring us closer to what is true. But we are almost never happy to discover we are wrong. And that tells us something important about what is really going on. The Buddhist teacher Shunryu Suzuki called this beginner's mind. He said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. When we are certain, when we know how things are, the world narrows. There is only one shore, and it is ours. But when we can hold our views with a little less certainty, when we can make space for the possibility that we might not be seeing the whole picture, the world opens up again. There are many shores, many views, many ways of understanding the same lake. This does not mean that all views are equally valid. Some views are harmful. Some are based on misunderstanding. The Buddha was clear that discernment matters, that right understanding is part of the path. But discernment and attachment are not the same thing. Discernment says, "I see this clearly, and I will act on what I see." Attachment says, "I am right and you are wrong, and I will not let go of this until you agree with me." The first is open. The second is closed. The first can change when new information arrives. The second cannot. There is a moment in the story of the two students that is easy to miss. It is the moment when the young man said, "You must have been at a different lake." Think about what is happening in that sentence. He is not saying, "How interesting, you saw something different from what I saw." He is saying, "What you saw cannot be real, because it does not match what I saw." This is the leap that attachment to views always makes. From "I see it this way" to anyone who sees it differently is mistaken. It happens very quickly. It feels natural. It feels reasonable. And it is the source of an enormous amount of unnecessary conflict. In relationships, it sounds like this: "You always do this," or "You never understand." In conversations about the world, it sounds like this: "Anyone who thinks that is clearly not paying attention." In our own minds, it sounds like the quiet, persistent voice that says, "I know better." The Buddha saw this pattern playing out at every scale of human life. Between individuals, between communities, between traditions. He saw that people were willing to cause tremendous harm in defense of their views, even spiritual views, even views about compassion and peace. The grip was that strong. And so his teaching on this was both simple and radical. Have views. Form opinions. Think clearly. Act on your understanding. But hold it all lightly. Be willing to set your view down when someone shows you a shore you have not visited. Be curious about what you might not be seeing. Be willing to be wrong. In the Sutta Nipata, one of the oldest Buddhist texts, there is a passage that says, "The one who does not cling to views, who is endowed with insight, that person will not be led by the ties of any view." This is not about being wishy-washy or having no convictions. It is about freedom. The freedom to see clearly without being imprisoned by what you see. The freedom to learn, to grow, to change your mind. the freedom to stand on one shore and know that there are others. The two students in our story eventually came to understand this. Not right away. It took time. It took the teacher a few days later, suggesting that they repeat the exercise, but this time, swap shores. The young man walked to the eastern shore, where the reeds grew tall and the shallows were alive with small fish darting through the warm water. He sat where the young woman had sat, and within minutes, he understood. The lake was alive here. It moved. It rippled. It breathed. It was nothing like what he had seen from the western bank. He sat for the full hour and watched the movement and the life, and he felt something give way inside him. Not his perception, his certainty. The young woman sat on the western shore. The deep water lay still beneath the high bank, and the surface was so smooth that the trees above were reflected with perfect clarity. She could see every branch, every leaf mirrored in the water. It was silent and luminous. And she understood too. This was also the lake. This stillness was just as real as the movement she had seen. When they met again that evening, neither of them needed to apologize. They simply looked at each other with a kind of quiet recognition. They had both been right, and they had both been wrong. Right about what they had seen. Wrong to assume it was everything. And in that recognition, something else became possible. They could talk to each other again. They could listen. They could be curious about what the other had experienced, instead of threatened by it. The wall came down, not because one of them surrendered, but because both of them realized that the wall was made of something that was never as solid as it seemed. It was made of certainty, and certainty, held too tightly, is just another form of the struggle we have been exploring all evening. The struggle in our lives is not only about what we want and what we resist and what we feel. It is also about what we believe. And when we can hold our beliefs a little more gently, when we can sit with the humbling truth that we are always standing on one shore of a very large lake, something eases. Not everything, but something important. Something that makes room for connection, for understanding, for the quiet recognition that the person who disagrees with us might not be our opponent. They might just be standing somewhere we have not yet been. Let us take a breath here. You do not need to change your mind about anything tonight. You do not need to agree or disagree. Just notice, gently, if there is anywhere inside you that is holding on tightly. And if there is, that is all right. It is human. It is natural. You can hold it, and you can also, when you are ready, loosen your grip just a little. And when that feels settled, we will continue. We have been together for a while now. The evening has moved along quietly, and perhaps you have noticed something about time. How it passes without asking permission. How one moment becomes the next so gently that we barely feel it happen. A breath comes in, a breath goes out, and already this moment is not the same moment you were in when the breath began. The Buddha noticed this too. He noticed it with such attention that it became one of the foundations of everything he taught. He called it anicca, a word that simply means impermanence. Everything changes. Everything moves. Everything that arises also passes away. This is not a grim idea. It is not meant to make anyone anxious or sad. It is simply what is true. And the Buddha believed that seeing what is true, clearly, and without resistance, is the beginning of freedom. We have spent this evening exploring the different ways we struggle. We have looked at craving and how the wanting mind keeps us reaching for things that cannot satisfy. We have looked at resistance and how fighting what is here creates more suffering than the thing we are fighting. We have looked at the emotions we push away, the people we close ourselves off from, the discomfort we refuse to meet, the views we hold too tightly, and the self we construct out of habit and concept. Each of these is a thread in the same fabric. And the fabric is woven from one thing: the unwillingness to let things be as they are, and to let them change as they will. Impermanence is the thread that runs beneath all of it. We crave because we want pleasant things to last. We resist because we do not want unpleasant things to arrive. We push away difficult emotions because we fear they will stay forever. We cling to our views because they give us a sense of solid ground. We construct a self because the idea of something fixed and permanent at the center of all this change feels safer than the truth. And the truth is that everything is moving. Everything is flowing. Nothing stays. But here is the part that changes everything. Impermanence is not only the source of our struggle, it is also the source of our freedom. Because if nothing stays, then no suffering stays either. No pain is permanent. No difficult feeling lasts forever. No struggle goes on without end. The very impermanence that frightens us is also what saves us. Everything passes, including the hard things, including the heavy things, including the struggle itself. There is a story about a Buddhist monk who was known throughout his region as a man of great calm. People came to him with their troubles, their worries, their fears, and he always seemed to know what to say. He was patient and steady, and nothing appeared to disturb him. One day, a young farmer came to visit. He was a practical man, not particularly interested in philosophy, but he had heard about this monk and was curious. "People say you are the most peaceful person in the province," the farmer said. "What is your secret?" The monk smiled. "I do not have a secret," he said. "I simply remember something that most people forget." "What is that?" "That this will end." The farmer frowned. "That sounds depressing." "Does it?" the monk said. He gestured to the garden around them. It was early autumn. The trees were beginning to turn. Gold and amber leaves caught the light. A few had already fallen, resting on the dark earth. "Look at these trees. Are they depressed because their leaves are changing?" "No," the farmer said. "They are beautiful. They are beautiful precisely because they are changing," the monk said. "If these leaves stayed green forever, if they never turned, if autumn never came, would you stop to notice them? Would you sit here in this garden and feel what you are feeling right now?" The farmer was quiet. He looked at the trees differently. After a while, he said, "But does it not make you sad, knowing that things will end?" "Sometimes," the monk said, "but sadness and attention are not the same thing. Sadness is about losing something. Attention is about noticing what is here before it changes. They can exist together, but they are not the same. And I have found that the more I pay attention, the less sadness there is to carry. Because I am not missing things. I am here for them while they are happening." The farmer sat with this. The garden was quiet around them. A leaf detached from a branch above and drifted slowly down, turning as it fell, catching the light on one side and then the other. They both watched it land on the path. "You see," the monk said softly, "you just watched that leaf fall. You watched it with your whole attention. For a moment, you were completely here, not thinking about your farm, or your work, or what you need to do tomorrow. Just watching a leaf. And how did that feel?" The farmer thought about it. "Peaceful," he said. "Simple. That is all I am doing," the monk said. "Just watching the leaves. Again and again, all day long. Watching whatever is here, and knowing that it will not always be here. And that knowing makes the watching feel like a gift." This is what the Buddhist tradition means by urgency. Not panic, not anxiety, not a frantic rushing to get things done before time runs out, but a quiet, warm attentiveness, a recognition that this moment is real, and it is here, and it will not come again. And that recognition, held gently, is one of the most powerful forces for waking up that there is. Without it, we drift. We fall into habit. We go through our days on a kind of automatic setting, doing the things we always do, thinking the thoughts we always think, reacting in the ways we have always reacted. The days blur together. The weeks blur together. Months pass that feel like weeks. Years pass that feel like months. And somewhere in the blurring, we forget to notice that we are alive. We forget that this is actually happening. Right now. This breath. This moment. This evening. Think about how much of your life has already passed while you were not quite paying attention. Not because you were careless. Not because you were doing anything wrong, but because the mind has a powerful tendency to be somewhere else. To be in the past, reviewing what happened, or in the future, planning what will happen next. And while the mind is somewhere else, the present moment, the only moment that is actually real, passes by unnoticed. The Buddha spoke about this often. He encouraged his students to reflect on the preciousness of this life, not in a heavy or fearful way, but in the way you might hold something delicate and irreplaceable. A piece of handmade pottery, a letter from someone you love, something you would not toss carelessly in a drawer, something you would hold with both hands, carefully, because you understand its value. That is how the Buddha asked us to hold our lives, with both hands, with full attention, with the understanding that what we are holding is brief and irreplaceable and extraordinarily precious. The word the Buddha used for the path he was teaching was sati, which is usually translated as mindfulness or awareness. And he described it as the one way. Not one way among many. The one way. The way of paying attention. This might sound narrow, but it is actually the opposite. Awareness is not a technique. It is not a method you practice for 30 minutes a day. It is not limited to a cushion or a retreat or a particular tradition. It is a quality of mind that is available in every moment, in every situation, no matter what you are doing. Sitting or walking, eating or resting, working or talking. In any moment, you can be aware. In any moment, you can notice what is happening, clearly and simply, without needing to change it or judge it or fix it. This is the thread that connects everything we have explored tonight. Awareness is what allows us to see the wanting mind without being swept away by it. Awareness is what allows us to feel the second arrow and put it down. Awareness is what allows us to sit with difficult feelings without running, to meet pain without fighting, to see the person behind the behavior, to recognize that the self is a pattern and not a prison, to hold our views lightly. Every teaching we have touched tonight comes back to this single quality. Pay attention, see clearly, be present with what is here. And the urgency is simply this: we can do this now, not tomorrow, not when things calm down, not when we have more time or more energy or a quieter life. Now, in this breath, in this moment, awareness does not require special conditions. It does not require silence or solitude or perfect health. It requires only the willingness to notice what is already happening. There is a Zen story about a student who asked his teacher, "What is the essence of Zen?" The teacher said, "Attention." The student waited for more. When nothing came, he asked, "Is there anything else?" "Attention," the teacher repeated. "Attention." The student was frustrated. "Surely there must be more to it than that," he said. "I have traveled a great distance. I have given up many things. I have come here to learn something profound." The teacher looked at him with great kindness. "There is nothing more profound than attention," he said. "Everything you are looking for is inside that word. Pay attention and you will see the truth of things. Pay attention and you will understand suffering. Pay attention and you will find peace. What more could you want?" The student sat with this for a long time, and slowly, over the weeks that followed, he began to understand. Attention was not a starting point. It was not the first step on a longer path. It was the whole path. The beginning and the middle and the end. Everything the Buddha had taught, everything the Zen masters had pointed toward, everything the great teachers had struggled to put into words, came down to this single, ordinary, extraordinary act: paying attention to what is here. And the remarkable thing is that anyone can do it. You do not need to be a monk. You do not need to be a Buddhist. You do not need to be wise or calm or disciplined. You just need to be willing, in any given moment, to notice what is happening, to feel the breath, to hear the sounds, to sense the body, to see the thoughts as they pass. That willingness, that simple turning of attention toward what is real, is the whole of the practice. The urgency is not about doing more. It is about being more present for what we are already doing. It is about waking up inside the life we already have. Not a bigger life, not a better life, not a different life. This one, the one that is happening right now, while you listen, while you breathe, while the evening settles around you. We began tonight with a question about why life so often feels like a struggle. And we have walked together through many rooms of that question. We have seen that the struggle comes from craving what is not here and resisting what is. It comes from pushing away the feelings that frighten us and holding too tightly to the views that comfort us. It comes from the concept of a separate, fixed self that must be defended and maintained. And underneath all of it, the struggle comes from our unwillingness to be fully present with the way things are, including the fact that the way things are is always changing. Each teaching tonight has pointed toward the same thing, though from a different direction. The old man searching under the lamppost was looking in the wrong place. The monk on the hillside was fighting a war that did not need to be fought. The young woman at the hermitage was propping up the very feeling she wanted to escape. The student looking at the night sky was drawing lines that were never really there. In every case, the suffering was being added by the mind. And in every case, the relief came not from doing something more, but from doing something less. Less grasping, less resisting, less adding, less fighting, less drawing of lines. The Buddha saw this with complete clarity, and what he offered was not a complicated philosophy. It was an invitation. Pay attention. Be here. Let things be as they are. Let them come and let them go. And in that allowing, discover the peace that has been here all along, beneath the struggle, beneath the grasping, beneath the resistance. A peace that is not created but uncovered, not achieved but revealed. This does not require perfection. It does not require years of training or a monastery in the hills or a teacher at the edge of a forest. It requires only a willingness to show up for this moment. And then the next one. And then the next. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha said, "This is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow, for the disappearance of pain, for the reaching of the right path." That is to say, awareness. Not a particular kind of awareness. Not awareness practiced in a certain posture or at a certain time of day. Just awareness. The simple, clear, kind seeing of what is here. That is available to you now. It has always been available. It does not depend on where you are, or how you feel, or how much practice you have had. It is as close as your next breath, as close as the feeling of your body resting where it rests, as close as the sounds reaching your ears in this very moment. The evening is getting late. The teachings have been offered, and now there is only this. Just this breath. Just this quiet. Just this moment, which has never happened before and will never happen again. And you are here for it. That is enough. That is everything. Let yourself soften now. Let whatever you have been holding begin to release. There is nothing left to learn tonight. Nothing left to think about. Just the feeling of being here, alive, aware, at rest. We have one more thing to share, and then we will say goodnight. The evening has come to its close. The stories have been told. The teachings have been offered. And now there is nothing left but this quiet. We began by asking why life so often feels like a struggle. And perhaps, after all we have explored together, the answer is both simpler and kinder than we expected. We struggle because we are holding on to what we want, to what we fear, to the feelings we refuse to feel, to the people we refuse to understand, to the views we refuse to question, to the self we refuse to release. And each of these small acts of holding creates a small tightness, and the tightnesses add up, and before long, life feels heavy. But the opposite is also true. Each small act of letting go creates a small opening, and the openings add up too. A little less grasping, a little less resistance, a little more willingness to be here, just as things are. And slowly, quietly, without fanfare, something lightens, something eases, something that was always underneath the struggle begins to show itself. It has been called many things by many traditions. The Buddha called it peace. You do not need to carry any of this with you. You do not need to remember every story or understand every teaching. If something landed, let it stay. If something did not, Let it go. There is nothing to hold on to. There never was. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.